This year, Clay Electric Cooperative marks 75 years of serving members in North Florida. The story of Clay Electric's growth over the years is also the story of how our nation and North Florida have changed. Today, Clay Electric is a modern utility using the latest technology, serving 165,000 homes and businesses across 14 counties. Clay Electric Cooperative is also one of the largest in the nation. Based on business principles that promote participation and ownership, Clay Electric is proud that it is member-owned, democratically organized, and controlled by those it serves. This is a story of people helping people. It's a story of bringing electricity to rural areas. It's a story of dedication and commitment. It's a story that will continue for generations. In 1935, President Franklin Roosevelt signed into law a bill that created the Rural Electrification Administration, or REA. Then, most of rural America had no electric service. Roosevelt wanted that to change. The cities had the power, and power companies concerned with profits weren't willing to run lines out to sparsely populated farmlands and rural communities. The REA's purpose was to bring power to rural folks. North Florida in the 1930s was a region of farmland, pine forests, swamps, sandy rut-filled roads, and a few isolated communities where electricity wasn't the rule but the exception. Driving from Keystone Heights to Palatka might take an entire day, perhaps two. Small communities like Keystone Heights had electricity produced by a small diesel-driven generator. It ran for a few hours in the evening and was shut off at midnight. This is where the story of Clay Electric really begins. Clay Electric would not have happened if not for the dedicated effort of a handful of folks who wanted an electric co-op to meet their power needs. In 1924, during the Florida land boom, the John Lawrence Development Company began building homes in an area of southwestern Clay County known for its beautiful lakes and rolling sand hills. It was named Keystone Heights. The Lawrence Development Company ran a small generator to produce electricity. Following some difficulties with maintaining the small power system, it was sold to E.G. Wiggins from Green Cove Springs. Wiggins was an employee of the Lawrence Development Company who took on the responsibility of generating power for the community. Wiggins liked operating the plant, so he bought the small system from John Lawrence in 1925. In the next few years, the small distribution system grew to more than 100 miles of line that stretched to Lake Geneva, Putnam Hall, Grandin, Flora Home, Lake Swan, and Lake Rosa. The diesel generator was outputting 115 kilowatts, and the lines carried 2,400 volts, which was stepped down to 120 or 220 volts for use at farms and homes. As more folks moved to Keystone Heights and surrounding areas, Wiggins realized he needed money to expand the system. He needed a bigger power station and more equipment to extend the lines. After word got out that Wiggins was seeking capital, he was approached by officials from the Florida Power and Light Company. But they didn't want to loan him money, they wanted to buy him out. Wiggins refused to sell the system. Wiggins learned about a federal government program under the Emergency Relief Appropriations Act, whose purpose was to lend money to extend electricity service into rural areas. He wrote to Mr. Cook, administrator of the new Rural Electrification Administration, and asked for information on how to obtain a loan. After receiving unsatisfactory responses, Wiggins traveled to Stark and asked Congressman Lex Green for help. Congressman Green told Wiggins he would contact the REA. Later, the REA sent a representative to Keystone Heights to meet with Wiggins, look over his distribution system, and see how many potential customers might be served in the area. After several days, the REA representative told Wiggins that he believed he could qualify for an REA loan. But Wiggins would have to extend electric service to everyone living in the region and also comply with the REA Act. After considerable thought, Wiggins decided that he didn't want to build and run an operation as large as the REA required.
37, when the REA started, some of the main ones in Keystone there could see that the system was going to be outdated after a while and going to be too small for the system. And the old Wiggins didn't want to have to rebuild and build another plant and everything else to go with it or increase his plant.
The REA representative discussed the possibility of selling his generation plant and distribution system to an electric cooperative. This idea appealed to Wiggins because he believed all the families in the country surrounding Keystone Heights should receive affordable electric service. Wiggins and the representative from the REA talked about the idea of forming a cooperative on radio station WRUF in Gainesville. A meeting was held in Gainesville, and a group of men, including Wiggins, were appointed to help organize the cooperative. Enthusiasm was high, and the group proceeded to sign up customers in rural areas of Clay, Alachua, Putnam, Columbia, Union, and Marion counties. But their efforts lost momentum as the Great Depression swept the nation and dampened spirits. The committee lost interest, but Wiggins pressed forward. He had University of Florida students draw up large county maps, and he continued to sign up rural folks for electric service. He placed a dot on his maps for every customer that said he wanted to be served by a cooperative. With maps in hand, Wiggins headed to Washington, D.C. to visit the REA. Wiggins met with the REA's new administrator, who said he was very interested in helping Wiggins form a cooperative. Wiggins received REA approval and was instructed to proceed with plans to organize the cooperative. The REA committed to loan the cooperative the necessary funds to serve the 6-county area. Returning home, Wiggins contacted 2 lawyers to help secure a charter from the state of Florida. Traveling around the 6 counties, Wiggins selected men to represent each county as incorporators until a board of directors could be elected by the cooperative's membership at its first annual meeting. At the cooperative's first official meeting on December 2, 1937, at the Keystone Inn in Keystone Heights, the incorporators elected F.Y. Doing as president. A week later, on December 9, 1937, the Clay Electric Cooperative Association was formed and received its charter from the state. Clay Electric was officially in business. The REA was true to its word, and its first loan to Clay Electric was approved on February 10, 1938 for $205,000. These funds would be used to construct 143 miles of line in Alachua, Bradford, Clay, Putnam, and Union counties. It was around this time that some of the co-op's members remember as a child seeing their first light bulb burning in the living room.
I was probably about 15 years old before we ever got electricity. We had, in fact, I did all my studying at home with a regular kerosene lamp. You know, that's what we had, was kerosene lamps. Didn't have a water pump or anything like that. We had to draw the water and all that kind of stuff. But and when we got the electricity, of course, we still didn't have water pump for a long time. But we had electricity and lights, and finally got a little old refrigerators that we used an ice box first.
The cooperative's first annual meeting was held in 1939. The cooperative continued to expand its lines into rural areas around North Florida. Around this time, the cooperative began publishing its kilowatt newsletters to members. Publishing of the kilowatt, along with other activities, was suspended when America was plunged into World War II by the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. Many of Clay Electric's employees left to join the war effort. Materials necessary to build and operate a distribution system were in short supply due to the war effort.
Actually, it was just at the end of World War II, and materials were still scarce and hard to get. Clay Electric was expanding as fast as possible, so we were on a waiting list and finally did get electricity in probably about 1947. And then the next thing was a refrigerator. And so we continued a lot of those practices for several years.
Following the war, Clay Electric began a period of growth. The growth that was occurring in Clay Electric's service area meant an increasing demand for electricity. From the start, Clay Electric generated its own power. The small diesel generator that powered Mr. Wiggins' distribution system was replaced and expanded, thanks to funds in the co-op's first REA loan. What Ed Wiggins had started was more than just a power company. He started a cooperative that hired men and women with drive, integrity, and the will to continue on with the same hard work and determination he put into forming the cooperative. Clay Electric employees liked working for the cooperative. It was and is a way of life for many employees.
It was a way of life that I really liked because I like that kind of work. I've always been there and enjoyed it. And co-op means an awful lot. In fact, it means an awful lot to the areas that we serve. It means a lot. And I think most of the customers, members, all feel about the same way about it too. I felt so good about going out and taking care of people's problems. I would even keep on my truck extra fuses, extra breakers, extra light fixtures and stuff like that. And if I got to that old fella's house out there, his wife would take it in, wash it or something to make a living, and she had a light that wouldn't work, I'd fix it before I left there. Didn't charge her a thing. You know, it was just something that I enjoyed doing. And I wouldn't walk up to a man's house and say, hey, you got a bad breaker here, see if you get somebody to fix it, and goodbye, I'm gone. You know, that wasn't the way I did things, and most servicemen didn't. We would do our best to help them. In other words, put a breaker in for them, or swap circuits around where they could get the lights back on or whatever they needed, and instead of just walking off and leaving them. You know, that was the customer to us, or to me, meant an awful lot. And as long as I could help anybody out there, regardless of race or whatever, that was what I wanted to do, and that's what I did. And you know, I didn't come back and tell the manager that I put a new light fixture in for a person. I didn't tell him. He didn't need to know it. But you know, that was just something that extra that we did, or I did, and I think it helped the relationship.
When Clay Electric brought electricity to the rural area, it was more profound than anyone could have imagined. People wanted Clay Electric service. One man who lived several miles from where the new lines were being constructed wanted electric service so bad he jacked up his house and moved his house to the new power line. As Clay Electric grew, word spread, and so did the interest of the rural people, and the people wanted what Clay Electric Cooperative had to offer.
He went to Clay's Electric and said, I want to hook on. And Clay's Electric said they were sorry they couldn't do it because the power line from the other energy place was here. So he went to work. He got a lawyer, went to court. Got to have Clay's Electric. We're not going to have this other line running through out there, going down in there. Clay's Electric was a cooperative, and you could become a member, and all the benefits and the help, and just seemed like a good caring company that took care of their customers, what the needs were. Still do today.
Later, REA loans financed a generation station in Keystone Heights that consisted of 3 large and 2 smaller diesel generators. Another 3 large diesel generators were located in a plant at Worthington Springs. Clay Electric generated electricity for nearly 30 years. These generators ran day and night to supply electricity.
We had generating plants to begin with, one right here where we're sitting. It had 3 1,000 kW generators and 2 450s. It was interconnected with one in Worthington Springs that had 3 1,000s in it. And they generated a large part of the power in those early years in the late 40s. But as the system began to grow, those plants were producing a very small part of the power. And we negotiated with Florida Power and Light for a power supply in their area and with Florida Power Corporation for power supply in their area. And those were tough negotiations. We had consultants helping us, of course, and to get us the best rate we could on wholesale power. We used the generating plants really as a wedge to get those rates because they didn't want us to expand our generation. They really wanted us to shut it down. And we really wanted to shut it down. It was small, it was inefficient. So we made an agreement with Florida Power and Light in about 1963 or 4 to run those plants out full bore, and they would let us run them at a top speed rather than having to drop them off and increase until we wore them out. We didn't want to just shut down operating engines, we wanted to use them up. So for about 3 or 4 years, we operated online with Florida Power and Light Company. We ran at full load and they took all the dips. And then finally in 1968, when we had agreed not to make major repairs or overhauls, and in 1968 we'd reached the point where we'd had 2 or 3 breakdowns major, and the decision was made, of course, with the board's approval to shut the plants down. And 1968, they both went down at the same time. I lived across the street from the plant. My office was right next to the plant. For all those years, I heard those engines thumping. And the day we shut them down, this end of town went silent.
In 1967, the generators in Keystone Heights fell silent, and a year later, the Worthington Springs plant was closed. Clay Electric began purchasing wholesale power from Florida Power and Light. Their baseload plants could generate power for less than what it cost Clay to generate it. Meanwhile, Clay and the other 14 electric co-ops in Florida had formed a generation and transmission cooperative known as Seminole Electric Cooperative. In 1973, the Arab oil embargo forced generators burning oil to raise their wholesale rates. Clay and the other co-ops decided it was time to activate Seminole. In 1975, Seminole purchased transmission line and generation capabilities. 2 years later, it announced construction of a large generation facility north of Palatka.
Seminole was created on paper and remained on paper for several years, as a statewide sponsored it, and then they had one employee to begin with, a general manager, and we all looked forward to having Seminole as a power supplier, because negotiating with the power companies for power and good wholesale power rates was a chore. They wanted to get as much for their power as they could, and we looked forward to having that's one of the biggest costs for the cooperative, of course, is the power. And we all look forward to having a generating plant producing power for us to use.
Needing to expand over the following decade, Seminole built a natural gas-powered facility in southwest Florida's Hardee County. 6% of Seminole's energy comes from renewable sources, such as biomass, municipal garbage, and landfill gas. In the early days, Clay Electric servicemen were based only in Keystone Heights. This created longer response time to power outages in outlying areas. Servicemen contacted the central office to check on trouble calls but telephones were few and far between. Today, Clay employs a modern radio and data communication system that enables service personnel to respond to outages within minutes. Growth in Clay service areas continued, and there was a need for district offices. Meadowbrook was the first district office, now called Orange Park, opened in 1964, and by 1967 we opened Gainesville, Lake City, and Palatka district offices.
As we began to establish district offices, we got a lot closer to the members. Our member relations improved. They could just travel a short distance and walk up to the counter and tell us about their needs. The line crews could be out on the job within 15 or 20 or 30 minutes. And a lot of money was saved by creating those district offices. And I was enjoyed very much a part of getting that going, one at a time. We got to convince people to move from here and hired a few new people in the area. Once made a second-class lineman a line foreman in order to fill that position in a district. But within a year or two, the adjustments came about and those districts began to operate on their own and made our member relations so much better.
And we've got the best, we've got our district managers and ones that out there working with them members every day. Can't be anything any better than that. And we're well liked. Our service is unreal. You know, we have the best servicemen and employees there is. I'm serious. People just want to work for Clay Electric. There's no question in my mind about that. And we at the board appreciate that.
I've been a member since 1948.
I started with Clay Electric January 27th, 1960.
43.
I started out with Clay Electric 39 years ago.
Worked here for 40 years.
And we've been on Clay Electric service since it was installed in 1948.
I ran for the board and was elected in March of 1965.
I have been a member of Clay Electric since August of 1969.
I have been a member of Clay Electric for 52 years.
Of course, I can remember back, having been served by Clay all of my life, I can remember back when it was small. You know, it was the major country roads that were inhabited, and now then, through time, we have people living everywhere, and Clay has been able to reach out and serve those people in these districts.
My grandfather, H.H. Surrency, came on the board in 1939, which was a year after Clay Electric was established. And he served until about 66, and my father came on the board in 1967. So there's been a Surrency on the board for 74 of the 75 years. I have always known about Clay Electric. It's just been a part of my life. I was able to travel to Tallahassee a couple of times with my dad just to see the legislative lobbying that goes on and the conversation with legislators. So it's just been, it's exciting to me to be able to continue to be a part of that.
Technology was improving, and in 1969, the co-op went from computer punch card to floppy disk drive for operations. Not only was technology improving, but safety was improving as well. In 1972, Clay Electric received the first NRECA safety accreditation.
Back in the early days, of course, we didn't have insulated bucket trucks. All the line work was done with men climbing poles on hooks and doing their work from the pole. And we had our last fatality in 1965. We had 2 or 3 before that, and we had some serious injuries from contact with the power lines. And it was from the way the work had to be done. It was more hazardous. And we became much more safety conscious and started doing our work more safely. We finally realized the need for a safety director and safety rules, and a lot more discipline and training. And then the insulated bucket trucks came along, and digger augers rather than digging holes by hand, a lot of hazards there. Used to use dynamite and setting poles a lot.
Another thing we did, we never set a pole normally. We didn't use dynamite. We used dynamite on everything we just about set. What they would do, they would dig down 3 or 4 feet, bore down the center of it, stick a stick of dynamite in it, and set the pole on top of it. And the dynamite would be down a foot or so below the base of the pole, so it wouldn't damage the pole. But then you set the dynamite off with the weight of the pole on, and it right down in the ground.
As you can see, we've come a long way from the early days of the co-op. In 1990, we signed up our 100,000th member, and today we have 165,000 members, making us the 8th largest co-op in the nation. The last 20 years have seen rapid changes in the way we do business. Just think how much computers have changed our lives, not to mention the internet. We now have so many ways to communicate with our members and to make our service faster and more efficient. We also have learned a lot from the big storms that have come our way, like the storm of the century in 1993 and Hurricanes Francis and Jeannie in 2004. Those experiences helped us develop new procedures to restore power quickly and safely so we can better prepare for the next storm. Clay Electric's success is largely due to its dedicated employees, both past and the present. Our mission is to exceed expectations by providing excellent customer service, reliable electric service at competitive rates. And that's our pledge to each and every one of our members. There's a sign that hangs in our lobby that says, "Proud of the past and prepared for the future." That slogan originated here at Clay Electric in the 1990s. I'd like to think it still applies today. We're very proud of how far we have come, and we're preparing now for the challenges that we will face in the years ahead. Thank you.